and welcome to The World Today. I'm Millicent Walker. First, the headlines. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, after his meeting with UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, says it's too early to talk about mediation in Ukrainian talks. Mr. Guterres heads on to Ukraine on Thursday, the last lap of his three-legged mediation journey in the Ukraine. US President Joe Biden reportedly concerned about the power of large social media amid Tesla boss Elon Musk's recent acquisition of Twitter. And South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa to address the country's parliament over the floods in KwaZulu-Natal province. On developments regarding the Russian invasion of Ukraine over the last few hours. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has been in Moscow late this morning. He met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov for talks regarding the war in Ukraine. Mr. Guterres says Russia has to remind people of equal sovereignty of UN member states. He says he came to Russia as a messenger of peace to save lives and reduce suffering, and that frank discussions took place between him and Mr. Lavrov. He also said he accepts Russia has grievances, but the UN is there to help address such issues. Mr. Guterres says the UN stands ready to fully mobilize its human and logistical resources to help save lives and evacuate people from Mariupol. Mr. Lavrov, on the other hand, said Russia is interested in working with the UN and with the Red Cross, but that it is too early to talk about mediation in Ukraine talks, though Moscow is committed to a diplomatic solution through talks with the government in Kyiv, and he dismissed Ukraine's proposal to stage talks in Mariupol, the besieged city that has been shelled heavily throughout the war in Ukraine.
About the repeated reports of violations of international humanitarian and human rights law and possible war crimes, and they require independent investigation for effective accountability. The United Nations is ready to fully mobilize its human and logistical resources to help save lives in Mariupol. My proposal is for a coordinated work of the United Nations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and Ukraine and Russian Federation forces to enable the safe evacuation of those civilians who want to leave, both inside the Azovstal plan and in the city, in any direction they choose, and to deliver the humanitarian aid required.
4 hours before his meeting with Mr. Guterres, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said in an interview with Russian state television that the Ukrainian conflict will end with an agreement, but its content will depend on the military situation. He, however, warned the West not to underestimate the elevated risk of nuclear conflict over Ukraine, saying he viewed NATO as being, in essence, engaged in a proxy war with Russia by supplying Kyiv weaponry. When asked about the importance of avoiding World War III and whether the current situation is comparable to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, he said he was doing a lot to uphold the principle of striving to prevent nuclear war at all costs. Lavrov also blamed Washington for the lack of dialogue, saying the United States has practically seized all contact simply because we were obliged to defend Russians in Ukraine. Well, Ukraine has responded to Russia's claims Western allies could be provoking a wider conflict by supplying Ukraine with weapons, describing the comment as utter nonsense. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba tweeted about this earlier today, saying Russia senses its defeat in Ukraine and is therefore trying to intimidate the West against supporting Kyiv by warning of the threat of World War III breaking out. He says this is the reason the world must double down on supporting Ukraine so that it can prevail and safeguard European and global security. Well, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, is expecting some 8.3 million people to flee Ukraine this year, revising up its previous projection. More than 12.7 million people have fled their homes in the past 2 months, including 7.7 million people displaced internally and more than 5 million who have fled over borders. This is coming from UNHCR spokesperson Shabir Mansour. UNHCR had previously planned some 4 million refugees in the immediate aftermath of the invasion on February 24, but this was surpassed last month.
Launching an updated regional refugee response plan for the Ukraine situation yesterday, UNHCR and partners are seeking $1.85 billion to support a projected 8.3 million refugees in neighboring countries, namely Hungary, the Republic of Moldova, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, as well as other countries in the region, including Belarus, Bulgaria, and the Czech Republic. 12.7 million people in the past 2 months alone, of whom more than 5 million have fled as refugees across the borders, and 7.7 million remain displaced inside the country. Almost 13 million more people are also estimated to be stranded in affected areas or unable to leave due to security risks.
Moldova has stepped up security measures after a series of explosions in the breakaway Russia-backed region of Transnistria. Moldovan president urged citizens to remain calm after explosions raised fears of a spillover from the conflict with Russia. Meantime, Germany's government has authorized the supply of about 50 anti-aircraft tanks to Ukraine. Well, here's more in this report.
We begin outside Ukraine today with the Polish foreign minister who is visiting India and talking about how the world was taken by surprise with Russia's aggression against Ukraine. While speaking on the Poles who opened their homes and their hearts to their Ukrainian neighbors, he spoke of a new dilemma affecting a lasting European consensus.
After 60 days of the war, we have certain debates going on in public or also behind the closed doors, where many European leaders, I must say, are facing the dilemma how to combine the protection of the most basic human values like human rights, the life, to live democracy and the preservation of international humanitarian law on one side and the economic well-being of their societies.
During the panel at the EU Meets the Balkans Forum in Sofia, the EU's Enlargement Commissioner said that if candidate countries were to spearhead social and economic reforms, as well as strengthen the role of law and democratic principles on the ground, the EU could not ignore their progress.
I cannot hide the fact that I'm extremely disappointed that we're still discussing this issue, because we thought that we have sorted it out 2 years ago. But now it's back on the table again. So, you know, if you have powers and you don't use it, it is also considered by others as a surrender of your powers and capabilities. So we need to trust ourselves, we need to trust our powers, and I think all member states should trust the transformative nature of the accession process.
Meanwhile, after Monday's missile attack by Russia aimed at disrupting weapons supplies to Ukraine's forces in the east, these firefighters tackled the blaze at a railway substation in the southwestern Ukrainian town of Krasny. In footage released by the Emergency Service of Ukraine, fire teams were seen using ladders and spraying foam to fight the blaze. In the meantime, Lithuania's President Gitanas Nausėda visited the United States warship. The U.S. has gravely docked in the Baltic Sea port city of Klaipėda. Speaking at a media briefing following the visit, Nausėda said that keeping the Baltic Sea open was important to the region. Lithuanian Chief of Defense Valdemaras Rupšys says to gathered media that the visit of the U.S. guided missile destroyer was a sign that the U.S. supports the security of Lithuania.
The cradle will drop. the gun will fire, and like the old saying goes, send rounds downrange.
Among the countries expected to announce an increase in military support for Ukraine at the meeting of NATO and EU defense ministers today is Germany. According to reports, the German government is set to back sending mobile anti-aircraft guns to Ukraine. The Gepard twin cannon system has been in service with the German army since the 1970s and is based on the chassis of the Leopard tank.
As we all know, the rules-based international order continues to be under threat with Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And we are here today to discuss what more we can do as countries and partners in support of Ukraine. Canada has trained 33,000 members of the Ukrainian Army, including 2,000 members of the Ukrainian National Guard.
Meanwhile, Russia says it is closely following events in Moldova's pro-Russian breakaway region of Transnistria as Moldova's president convened an urgent security meeting Tuesday. Transnistria has been subject to several attacks in the past day. Local authorities reported a military unit was targeted. Blasts tore through Transnistria's state security headquarters and 2 explosions damaged old Soviet-era radio antenna. Over in Zaporozhye, southern Ukraine, the regional government have released videos of people shoring up the city's defenses, preparing for possible Russian attack. Video clips showed excavators digging up soil and workers in trenches. At least 1 person was killed and another wounded in a rocket strike on a commercial premises on Tuesday.
Joining us for more now on the latest in Ukraine is Michel Agatishe, foreign affairs expert and lawyer. Thanks for joining us on the program. I'd like to begin with UN Secretary General's visit to Moscow and all that we've seen come out of that visit. What were your expectations and did they meet them?
Thank you very much, Millicent, and it's always a pleasure to be here. My expectations when the UN Secretary General was going really was to go and, try his very best to diffuse the situation, to try his very best to communicate, the uproar of the world, particularly the United Nations, particularly because we have seen several instances where we have seen resolutions, etc., from the United Nations. Now, to the extent that the current geopolitical situation is quite sensitive, there clearly has been, or there is a limit to what he can say. He has to speak sturdily enough, such as to ensure that his message goes across, but also at the same time, he has to be at least amicable enough, such that channels of communication do not close. To my mind, I think he balanced that very well, and he was able to clearly articulate the stern consternation of the world while ensuring that at least channels of communication will remain open. So I think he did a good job. But the impact of this will be seen in the coming months when we see whether there, in fact, will be a de-escalation. And I also look forward to what he will say when he arrives in Ukraine in coming days, because this was the first part of a 2-part trip spanning Ukraine and Russia. And finally, just to say that, of course, we can never really know the entirety of what was discussed. All we were availed is what was discussed during the press conference. So, of course, if there have been other discussions held in secret, in camera rather, confidentially, whether that is effectively communicated to the Ukrainian side and whether that can then create a platform for, should I say, resolution of this conflict, then we can celebrate.
Let's talk about Moscow's position. And Lavrov made that comments when he complained the Western involvement in Ukraine has been sort of used as a foothold to limit, control, provoke, aggravate, if you will, Russia. And, do you think that there is a real threat of World War III?
Well, I think the first thing to say, and I would like to borrow that from Shakespeare, who said that all is fair in love and war. For Russia to come arms in the air basically stating that, there shouldn't be any interference, I think is quite a rich statement to make. Why? Because, of course, you're pulverizing a country. You would expect them to try and seek aid, military aid from elsewhere, and for that to indeed come through. If this precipitates or results in a third world war, particularly if it results in nuclear warfare, then to a large extent, I would say that it would have resulted from an overreaction from Russia. Remember that what Russia had said at the start of their justification was that they were doing this as a peace mission to protect the people of Eastern Ukraine. If this were to result in Third World War, i.e., Russia possibly attacking a NATO country and the NATO country then triggering Article 5 that enables all of NATO to come into war, then clearly it would demonstrate that this was never about Eastern Ukraine, and this was about ensuring that there's no further expansion, right, of NATO to the doorstep of Russia, which we all believe it to be the case. That being said, it is not our prayer for there to be a third world war. We already are suffering the impact economically of this war between Ukraine and Russia, and one can only imagine what it would be if it were to extend beyond that. I just want to add a final point, though. It also is a question of interpretation. The NATO countries have been quite careful not to put boots on the ground, but rather to arm Ukraine to defend themselves. However, I understand that a couple of days ago, it was Sergei Lavrov who said that as far as Russia is concerned, the Western countries are part of this war because they are arming Ukraine. Thus, it appears that if they have taken that interpretation and the United States and the rest of NATO continues on the basis that they have, which is extra funding, I understand that after Blinken and Austin visited Ukraine a couple of days ago, a further announcement was made about $800 million in arms. So if Russia continues to view this as an act of war, then, your guess is as good as mine that we do not know what the reaction of Russia to NATO and the other countries funding Ukraine might be.
And perhaps finally, in a minute or two, if you can, another thing that might also affect their reaction might also be what we're hearing from Finland and Sweden, the announcing simultaneous bids, which it is reported that it will happen next month. Do you think this will aggravate, the situation between Russia and Ukraine?
I think it will aggravate the situation between Russia and Ukraine. I also think that it may also lead to Russia expanding their, military actions, potentially to cover those countries, because for many foreign policy analysts, they have been able to see beyond the smoke screen of protecting Donbass and Luhansk and seeing that indeed Russia's end game is to prevent NATO expansion to their doorstep. Finland has a very long border with Russia, and that could also be bringing NATO to the doorstep of Russia. So, of course, I think it would aggravate the current conflict that we see. That being said, what is currently on contemplation at the moment is an application to join NATO, right? It is for NATO to then accept that application. And I'm not sure that NATO will be willing right now to admit them both, because if they were to do so, that's almost walking toward a solution, right? Almost working toward a particular end goal. Because, we almost immediately know that the next reaction will then be for Russia to either attack or do something that may aggravate the whole situation. So for all parties to kind of keep things as they are, even if that application was made, what I see as a potential middle ground is a sort of defense pact, wherein NATO, as they have done with Ukraine, assures that, look, if you're under attack or anything of nature, we'll defend you. But, admitting them to NATO at this time, could be problematic. And just to finally touch on that point, the context to this all was that, after the fall of the Iron Curtain and the breakup of the USSR, in opposition to NATO was the Warsaw Pact. And I believe sometime in 2007, there was an international agreement between Russia and the erstwhile Warsaw Pact countries and the United States that there was going to be a mutual de-escalation of expansion, for lack of a better phrase. So, we also don't want a situation, or I'm not sure the world wants a situation where, Finland and the other are admitted, and it then gives, should I say, justification, right, to Russia saying, look, you're being in the face of, this agreement and you're not adhering to it and all. So it will be a problematic situation, really, it will be.
All right, Mitchell, a lot to talk about on this issue. Also seeing as Moldova is saying they're stepping up security measures, seeing what has happened in Transnistria. But thank you. We always appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on the program.
No, it's always a pleasure to be with you, Millicent. I really do appreciate this. Thank you very much, and do have a great rest of the day.
To you as well. Which is planning to speed up development of its nuclear arsenal, according to leader Kim Jong-un in his address while overseeing a huge military parade that displayed intercontinental ballistic missiles and other weapons. The parade featured North Korea's largest known ICBM, the Hwasong-17. The procession also included rows of conventional weapons such as artillery, rocket launchers and prototype tanks, plus tens of thousands of goose-stepping troops. The parade, according to North Korean media, happened Monday night during celebrations for the founding anniversary of North Korea's armed forces and comes as Pyongyang steps up weapons tests and displays of military power amid stalled denuclearization talks with the United States and incoming conservative administration in South Korea. Well, staying with the celebration, South media released a video of leader Kim Jong-un earlier in the day visiting a cemetery to mark the 90th founding anniversary of Korean People's Revolutionary Army. In the video, high-ranking officials were seen offering flowers before statues of late officers at the Revolutionary Martyrs Cemetery on Monday. An honor guard was also seen marching at the cemetery. It's official. Twitter has accepted Tesla CEO Elon Musk's offer to acquire the company at $44 billion. Twitter's independent board chair, Brett Taylor, said that Twitter board conducted a thoughtful and comprehensive process to assess Elon's proposal with a deliberate focus on value certainty and financing. The takeover has drawn reactions from even U.S. President Joe Biden, whom the White House says is concerned about the power of large social media.
Nothing happening in the world today here. So what I can tell you as a general matter, no matter who owns or runs Twitter, the president has long been concerned about the power of large social media platforms, the power they have over our everyday lives, has long argued that tech platforms must be held accountable for the harms they cause. He has been a strong supporter of fundamental reforms to achieve that goal, including reforms to Section 230, enacting antitrust reforms, requiring more transparency, and more. And he's encouraged that there's bipartisan interest in Congress. In terms of what hypothetical policies might happen, I'm just not going to speak to that at this point.
Questions on the coronavirus, Jen?
Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry says there is no basis to circulating speculation that Beijing could try to use leverage over electric car maker Tesla in order to influence content on U.S. social media site Twitter Incorporated. Foreign Minister spokesperson Wang Wenbin said in response to a question about it during the regular daily briefing, quote, "I noticed that you're good at speculating, but there is no basis." We're all still talking about it, aren't we? Elon Musk clinching a deal to buy Twitter Incorporated for $44 billion cash Monday in a transaction that will shift control of social media platform populated by millions of users and global leaders to the world's richest person. It is a seminal moment for the 16-year-old company, which emerged as one of the world's most influential public squares and now faces a string of challenges. Musk has criticized Twitter's moderation, calling himself a free speech absolutist, saying that Twitter's algorithm for prioritizing tweets should be public, and has criticized giving too much power on the service to corporations that advertise. Political activists expect that a Musk regime will mean less moderation and reinstatement of banned individuals. Conservatives cheer the prospect of fewer controls, while some human rights activists voice fears of a rise in hate speech. Well, Musk himself has described user-friendly tweaks to the service, such as an edit button and defeating spam bots that send overwhelming amounts of unwanted tweets. His move continues a tradition of billionaires buying control of influential media platforms, including Jeff Bezos' 2013, his acquisition of the Washington Post. Well, Twitter said Musk secured $25.5 billion of debt and margin loan financing and is providing a $21 billion equity commitment. Well, joining us to make sense of all of this and what indeed is Twitter's future under Elon Musk, Benga Chesson is a digital expert, CEO, Paradigm Initiative. He joins us now virtually. Thanks, Benga, for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
So we're saying that after the news of that deal, human rights groups raising concerns about hate speech on Twitter and the power it could give Mr. Musk. Are you concerned with this, with what we're hearing? I mean, I saw an Amnesty International thread saying we're concerned that, you know, the steps that Twitter might take to erode enforcement of policies and mechanisms designed to protect users.
I mean, everyone is concerned. I think it's very clear that when rich people acquire power and use that power to protect their wealth, then their main priority is not anything but themselves and their own interests. And that is a major challenge, not just even for human rights, but also even for human decency, because it then means that, whoever owns this, now, when it was a platform owned by various stakeholders, now that was different. It was a different conversation. You could have various stakeholders who were leaning in different directions. But now when you have a platform that has become literally the digital public square, then it is owned by one individual, then it means that individual, purchased it for reasons best known to him. Of course, none of us will know right now exactly what Elon Musk is going to do with Twitter, but a few things are clear. So number one is being very clear, about how is, a respect of free speech and things like that, even though many people are worried that his take on being a respecter of free speech is not exactly in terms of, protecting everyone, but just in terms of any powerful person who, of course, everybody is thinking, is Donald Trump coming back? My wife and I were talking about that, and I said, well, I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump comes back to Twitter. So yes, I am concerned because, first of all, there is the challenge that even if Twitter was not owned by one individual, there's a challenge that we're now in a kind of space, in a digital space, where we've created for ourselves a big problem that many of us did not anticipate. And that problem is that we assumed that if everyone had a chance to speak, they would say what is decent, what is fair, and what respects the right of others. That's not exactly the case we have right now. But also, we have a challenge because there are people who now depend on this platform for the work that they do that are very sensitive. There are countries where there are activists, my colleagues in other countries, who do sensitive work, who do work that allows them to criticize government, to speak up on public issues, but are able to do this when required anonymously. Now, that may not exactly be something that the new Twitter under Mr. Musk will enjoy, and that will be a challenge, of course, for people who work in human rights. But apart from that, I mean, it will be interesting to see what direction Mr. Musk goes. But clearly, what will dictate for him what to do is not going to be human dignity, is not going to be what is right. It is definitely going to be something that would bring, of course, returns for him. And that's where the challenge is. When millions, tens of millions of people who have created this kind of space where they speak freely are now subjected to the whims and caprices of one man, then that is a major challenge.
But Benga, do you think that accounts suspended by the company will be allowed to return, do you think?
We don't know. I mean, we don't know that for a fact because I know that as much as everyone expects that, Elon Musk is going to bring Donald Trump back to Twitter, one of the considerations he's also going to have is what is going to be the impact of that on the platform. Is that going to make users migrate? By the way, there are people who are already having conversations about migrating to open source platforms because don't forget, before this acquisition, there was already a debate about the future of Twitter being a platform that supports openness, where, and I guess an easy way to explain this is that when the internet started, the internet was supposed to be an open platform, in an open space where everyone could contribute. But as things continued, people like Facebook, Twitter, and others began to build somewhat, what looks like gardens, so they have this garden, these walled gardens of themselves. There's a Twitter space where when you are there, you're not communicating with anyone else. When you're on Facebook, you're on Facebook, you're not communicating with anyone else. So you're not really on the entire internet, you're just in this walled garden. And so there had been this debate about making sure that we move to the original design of the internet, which is about, protocols, not platforms that have now been created as walled gardens. Now, what I suspect is that conversation is going to suffer a major setback, because we were thinking of things becoming more open, but now things are definitely going to become more proprietary. And don't forget, this is richest man in the world who's conquered space and who definitely considers acquisition of Twitter as a win for himself. And well, while he will try to do what is best for his business, there's also the unfortunate side of the ownership ego that is going to come in here. But we can never tell, what's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to bring Donald Trump and others who have been suspended back. But my suspicion is that one of the things that he's going to push for is that everyone has a right to say whatever they want to say. And so anyone who has been suspended should be reviewed. And if they have not been found to say anything that is illegal, should be brought back. And that is
but the truth, Benga, is that we're already seeing tweets and people are saying that former President Donald Trump should be brought back. But let's go over to the EU, and, they're in the midst of finalizing the Digital Services Act to create a global gold standard platform regulation. Some have said that this is likely to affect, the practical exercise of free speech on social media platforms. What's your take? And this is also wondering what Nigeria can learn from the EU in this regard.
The second part of your question is I think it's the reason why I'm here. Because first of all, I'm Nigerian, and it's been interesting seeing Nigeria's reaction to the global debate. So there's a global debate happening in terms of social media. Unfortunately, Nigeria's reaction has been interesting in two ways. Number one, the Nigerian government wants to tax what it does not create an atmosphere for. So the Nigerian government wants to tax Twitter, wants to tax Facebook and all others. But the question is, are we creating the environment for the Twitters of Nigeria? And I'm not saying copying Twitter now, but the innovative ideas in Nigeria, are they able to thrive in Nigeria? Unfortunately, there's that one part of what Nigeria can learn. Before you can start taxing things and making it become a global platform, you have to create the atmosphere for it. So Nigeria has no business chasing a Twitter to shut it down. What we should be doing is creating the atmosphere for alternatives and for many other innovative ideas to thrive on our own soil. The second thing, where we have a challenge is that the process in the EU, the process in many other countries has had to go through parliament. In Nigeria, the government has tried to go through parliament, but when they brought, the two unpopular bills, the one on hate speech and the one on, social media, on internet falsehood, unfortunately, those bills were, full of contradictions. They were clearly attempts at gagging people, which is unfortunately quite consistent with, what has been happening with this administration and even some before it. But the interesting thing is that other countries, including the EU, the DSA, the Digital Services Act in the EU, is going through a legislative process. What Nigeria can learn is that if we really want to find a solution to the twin problems of hate speech and fake news, then we should do it the right way. And the right way to do it is to take this through parliament. If you take it to parliament and the people that you are saying you're trying to protect say they don't want the bill, like they did with the hate speech bill, like we did with the hate speech bill and the social media bill, then it means you go back to the drawing board, or you listen to the service providers, you listen to the users, and then you produce a bill that is based on what solves the problem, not what helps a governor arrest anyone because they say something about his wife's makeup or something like that. So, two things we can learn. Number one, instead of chasing shadows, instead of trying to clamp down on digital services, Nigeria, let's create an atmosphere where innovation can thrive. Number one. And number two, if we want to do what is called social media regulation and all of the debate happening around the world, we have to do it right. And doing it right means doing it through the parliament, not a minister announcing on June 4, we have banned a platform. That's not what others are doing. And the reason why they're not doing it that way is because it's not sustainable.
Yes, so talking about that ban, I know the federal government said, that Twitter had agreed to several demands, but a lot of people are wondering if things would change, because we haven't seen a lot happen, such as, getting an office in Nigeria, for example, amongst other lists. Do you think that would change also under, the new owner, Elon Musk?
So if there was an agreement, we can talk about something changed. There was no agreement. I am saying this live on Channels TV. The Nigerian government lied. There is no written agreement with Twitter. The minister lied. So, unfortunately, what didn't exist cannot change.
Well, we don't really know for certain. We only know what the federal government has said with this regards. But it's interesting that you are saying this, countering the federal government's statements and their efforts to indeed Twitter. But that's the much we can take at this time. We'd like to thank you, Gbenga. Always a pleasure. As the CEO of Paradigm Initiative, also a digital expert. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
In another development, India says U.S. electric vehicle car maker Tesla Incorporated is welcome to set up shop in the country, make cars there for sake and to export them. Tesla is desperate to import and sell its electric vehicles in India, having lobbied officials in New Delhi for nearly a year to cut tariffs, which the company's billionaire chief executive Elon Musk says are among the highest in the world. But its efforts are at stalemate, as Tesla has not revealed a firm plan to invest in India, except that would be in line with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Make in India vision to boost local manufacturing and create jobs. One migrant has died and 26 more still missing after a dinghy they were traveling in capsized in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Spain's Canary Islands. The Coast Guard rescued 34 people after the vessel capsized around 135 miles off the southern tip of Gran Canaria on Monday. The Coast Guard said another 2 vessels carrying around 63 people, including 2 children, were found floating in the sea around 40 miles off the south of Gran Canaria. All those on board were rescued. Authorities were alerted April 24 to a dinghy that had left Cabo Bojado in Western Sahara, a disputed territory claimed by Morocco, with 16 migrants aboard. The Coast Guard said only 34 of them have been found. And here on the continent, the South African president has promised more help to rebuild communities devastated by the recent floods, but has warned of tougher measures to ensure relief funds are not lost to corruption. Some 435 people died and more than 50 are still missing, most in KwaZulu-Natal province. Cyril Ramaphosa says the flooding is evidence that climate change is the biggest threat to the future of humanity. Meanwhile, the depths of rescue workers searching for victims during the recent floods has highlighted the risks to emergency services personnel when they are called upon to save victims of extreme weather events, which are becoming more frequent as the climate warms.
Brave and fearless is how colleagues remember South African police diver Busiswe Mjwara, who was laid to rest on April the 22nd after she drowned while searching for flood victims in the east coast city of Durban during one of the country's worst natural disasters in living memory. Torrential rains on April the 11th and 12th triggered a deluge of destruction that claimed some 435 lives and displaced tens of thousands of people as homes, roads and bridges were swept away. Part of multiple search and rescue operations, Sergeant Mjwara, a 42-year-old mother of 2 young children, was pulled from the swollen Mzodozi River, which was trying to locate 3 missing people before getting into difficulty on April the 17th. She was airlifted to hospital but declared dead on arrival. Mjwara's family are struggling to come to terms with their loss. In a statement announcing Mjwara's death, police said a canine rescue dog, Leah, from a separate search and rescue unit lost her life trying to assist Mjwara. Another policewoman also died a few days earlier after her home collapsed due to the floods.
She was fearless, brave, dedicated, and she served with all her heart. She served with honor and with integrity. And all the time I spent with her, I can tell you Pussy is kind, loving, warm-hearted, strong woman, a dedicated mother, a dedicated wife, a dedicated friend, a dedicated policeman.
The packed City Hall service, where Mjwara's coffin was draped in the national flag and a police choir sang traditional Zulu church hymns, was attended by senior politicians and high-ranking police officials.
Young as she is, umsebenzi ongenziwa abantu abaningi. Akafelanga emaniyaleni, akasifelanga yena, akafelanga ngisho ifamily yakhe, ufele isizwe. Why would we not be proud of that?
The deaths of Sergeant Mjwara and other rescuers highlight the risks to emergency services personnel when they are called upon to save victims of extreme weather events, which are becoming more frequent as the climate warms.
May the souls of the departed rest in peace. And about 3/4 of Beijing's 22 million people today lined up for COVID-19 tests as authorized by the government. Having seen the struggles of China's commercial hub to meet the basic needs of its increasingly frustrated 25 million residents, people in Beijing have been stocking up on food and supplies. Today, authorities began closing some gyms, theatres, tourist sites after it announced it would conduct tests on 10 other districts and one economic development zone by Saturday, April 30. The Chinese capital reported 33 new locally transmitted cases for April 25. The city's health authority said that 32 of them were symptomatic and 1 asymptomatic. This is slightly higher than 19 community infections, which was reported a day earlier. Pope Francis today abruptly cancelled his activities for the day because of a flare-up in knee pain. A statement from his doctors ordered him to rest and that he would not participate in a meeting of an international council of cardinals, which advises him on church matters. Normally, Pope Francis would be seated during such a meeting, indicating that the latest flare-up was likely particularly serious. The 85-year-old Pope has had to curtail events in recent weeks because of the pain in his right knee. Several times over the Easter period, he attended but did not preside at Masses at St. Peter's Basilica. In each case, he delegated an archbishop or cardinal to say the Mass while he sat through the service and also read his homily while seated. He suspended activities last Friday for medical checks in the Vatican, but resumed them over the weekend. On Monday, he held 6 private audiences. We have to warn you, this next video might be hard to watch. We're looking at dramatic police body cam footage showing the moment officers arrived on the Rust film set in the United States after a gun went off in actor Alec Baldwin's hand, killing a cinematographer. Footage from Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office released on Monday shows medics, officers and people tending to the cinematographer Halian Hutchins and film director Jill Souza before they were brought out on stretchers and placed into the ambulance. 42-year-old Hutchins was killed during filming October when the revolver Baldwin was holding fired a live round that struck her in the chest and lodged in the shoulder of Souza. Souza survived the gunshot wound. Baldwin has also, producer on the film, has been named in several lawsuits filed in connection with Hutchins' death, including one by her husband, Matthew. Baldwin has denied responsibility for Hutchins' death and said live rounds should never have been allowed onto the set of the Western film at the Bonanza Creek Ranch in New Mexico. April 20, New Mexico's Occupational Health and Safety Bureau gave a $136,793 fine to Rust Movie Productions and said that it had found that the Rust production company had not developed any process to make sure live rounds were not present on the movie set, a violation of safety standards.
You guys want to see Vincent? Find out the ETA on the bird. 32 Santa Fe, what's ETA on the bird?
And finally on the program, writers under deadline can now go to Tokyo's Manuscript Writing Cafe with this understanding: they can't leave until their work is done. And there's prodding thrown in to make sure they buckle down and finish. Recently opened this April in Western Tokyo, the clean, well-lit place has 10 seats reserved for writers, editors, manga artists, and anybody else grappling with the written word and deadlines. Upon entering it, customers will be handed a slip of paper on which they need to write down their names, writing goals, and the amount of time they need to finish. The cafe staff will hold customers accountable by checking in with them on their progress. They can choose from mild, normal, and hard, 3 levels of progress checks. And customers who choose mild will only get a verbal confirmation when they pay at the counter. And those who choose normal will get a progress check every hour. For those who decide to go hard on themselves, they will feel silent pressure from staff who will stand frequently behind them. Inspired by a famous Japanese tale for children, the restaurant of many orders, which depicts a bizarre restaurant setting off specific instructions for customers before they enter the restaurant, owner of the Manuscript Writing Cafe, Takuya Kawai, says he aims to create a space where people will feel tense at first, but gradually relax and be able to focus on their work. Customers are charged about 130 yen, that's $1 for the first 30 minutes, and then 300 yen, $2.34 for every hour. They will not be able to pay until they finish the work they declared upon entering. Some place to visit during the holidays. Well, that's the world today. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Have a good evening.